Welcome to the fastest stop in town. Today on Masechtas Sotah Daf Lamed Hey, we're going to begin on the very last line on the Lamed Daled Mid Beis. The pasuk says V'yashuva mitur aretz, referring to the Meraglim when they return from spying the land. As we continue the Lamed Hamad Aleph, V'yelchu v'yavo. So it's an interesting language that they came, they went. So this is also brought down in Rashi and Chumash. Rav Yochanan, Mishum Rav Shimon ben Yochai, Makash Halicha Labia. We make a connection. Ma bia be'etzara, af halicha be'etzara. Not only when they came back, they gave an etzara, but they had already in their minds decided with this bias. They thought already they were going to end up looking at something negative. They walked into Eretz Canaan without an open mind. V'yisapru lo v'yamru bonu v'gaimer. Uksiv efes ki az Rav Yochanan Simon emes levado levoya mishum Rameir kol lashon hara she'inbo davar emes but chilasu ein miskayim b'sayfai. If you're just going to say lies straight through, people can read right through it. But if you start off by saying truth, then all of a sudden people think, okay, he's talking truth, and therefore they're not going to question it. Their guard will be down, and this is exactly what happened. They started speaking about things which were absolute factual, that they saw the fruit of the land and that the nation was strong. Vayahas kalev el Moshe, and he silenced. Rabbi shehe sisan b'devarim. He actually seduced them with words. Pasach Yoshua, when Yoshua began to come ishtoi, when he began to speak, Amrilei Dain Roish Ketia Yamalel, that the head will be cut off with praise. Says Rashi, what's going on over here? So first of all, Rashi says Eina Miskayim Shemachzikanoisen Hashaymin Kavdoyin. They'll look like liars if you just start with a lie. Shaminu, they start believing you. They start praising the land. V'yahas is shitkan, that he was silenced. He's silenced. El Moshe, okay. So Omar, so Kalev said, if I speak, Amri Bil Milsa v'chasmin, they'll end up silencing me. V'chasminli. Amalahen. So he said to them, "You think that's the only thing that Moshe did? So stop it. Say kamishtoy." So they thought that he was actually going to end up agreeing. Otherwise, they would have silenced him, which unfortunately we see a lot of times nowadays in colleges, that if you don't agree to an opinion, even though we think we live in a country where you can speak your mind, but if you don't agree to the way I think, then everyone starts screaming. So that's what the Meraglim did. This is someone who is unwilling to accept another opinion. And they therefore thought, okay, well, let him speak, because clearly he joins in our camp, in our thought process. So Ashtiku, they were quiet. Amalhu, Hotzian Mitzrayim, he took us out from Egypt. So all these different things Moshe did for us, and Hashem did. Im Amar Asu Sulamois Alurakia Onishmo. If you tell me to build a ladder and go up to the heavens, we'll listen to him. I'm going to do whatever he says. Oh, now of Yerashno Oisel. Let's go up and we'll inherit it. But oh, Imo Amrlo Nuchal. No, there's no way we're going to be able to do it. Amr Chanina Bar Papa Davar Gadol Dibra Meraglim Boisa Shah. The main person from the Meraglim spoke. Ki Chaza Humimenu. What does that mean? Menu Elomi menu from Hashem. Kaviyachol afil bachambayis and yachol haitzi kelu misham. As though to say that Hashem himself would not be able to take the kalim out of there, which basically is saying that Hashem, Rashi says, the Balabayas, the Adon Ha'olam, is not capable of being able to cause us to be spared. Some people explain because maybe the pshat is, of course, Hashem was doing everything. How could they possibly think Hashem couldn't have us go into Eretz Canaan? But Hashem was taking care of us. When we go to Eretz Canaan, we had to fight the wars. We had to plant the food. We had to become independent. So maybe they were saying, Hashem is not going to really intervene, and it's just going to be completely on us. And based on us, there's no way we could win. Obviously, with the help of Hashem, of course, they would imagine, it's logical, they saw the Nisim. But nonetheless, because they thought perhaps this is it, Hashem is not going to intervene once we get into Eretz Canaan, things are different. Okay. Fine. So that was Kaviyachal, Fil Bahabayas, and Yachal Haitzakel Mishon. And then it says, Eretz Ochelas Yoshvahi. This is a land in which it consumes its inhabitants. So this is obviously a terrible, terrible thing that's being said, that the people that live there are basically going to die. It's not a land in which you're going to end up living a nice, long life. So on this, the Gemara says, Darish Rabba Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ani chashavti halatayva deim chashav ra. The only reason why I did what I'm going to explain is for the good, and they ended up interpreting it for the bad, which unfortunately a lot of times happens. People do good things for you, and you end up just looking at it as a negative. But the truth is, Hashem did it something positive. Let's see. Every time they went, wherever they went, people were dying, and very chashiv leaders died. Why did Hashem have them die dafk at that place at that time? Nitradu, so that everyone's going to be busy with their funeral arrangements. And therefore they're not going to say, "Hey, what are you guys doing? You're spies." It's kind of fishy, right? Who are these 12 adults going all over the country? So and what do they end up saying? Oh, it's because people are dying. Yeah, people did die, but the reason why it was done was for your benefit. So you could always look at, unfortunately in life, someone does something good for you, but if you're not a makar toiv and you want to therefore not accept the good, or you don't feel it fits into your narrative, you're just going to end up saying everything was not for your purpose. And it was not beneficial. It was actually Eov that died. And Rashi says, Shalo tagin zechusa alehen, v'anu di'amri kolev sar silmi alehem. So it was actually Eov that died. V'itridu kuli alma b'afseda. Everyone was at his hefsed because his hesped. His hesped was obviously this eulogy is very significant. Again, they thought land is consuming its inhabitants. So we were like grasshoppers. They're really liars. Why? Because Bishlama vanihi be'einenu kechavim, in our eyes, okay, great. El v'chein hayinu be'einehem menahav yadeh. How did they know? He wasn't asking them their feelings. V'lohi ki havi mavrei abele tute arzi havi mavrei. That coming, when they were coming from the cemetery, they were under cedars. Havi Mavri, they were feeding them. And when they saw them, they got up from sitting in the tree. We heard them saying, it looks like there's a bunch of like grasshoppers. So in other words, it's possible that they did overhear it. Alternatively, another interesting way of looking at it psychologically is that if you think something bad about yourself, you project that onto others. So therefore, if you think you're tiny and insignificant or unimportant, then you're going to think that everyone else thinks of you that way as well, even though it may not necessarily even be the case. Fatisa kol eda v'yitnuas koil v'yivcha, everyone started crying. Amar Rabam Rav Yochanan osa hayoyim erev Tisha B'av haya. It was Tisha B'av. It says erev Tisha B'av was that night. It was Tisha B'av. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, Hein bochu b'chiyah shalchina v'yani eflahem b'chiyah l'dayis. It's a famous Gemara, also in Tainus, that you are crying a b'chiyah b'chinam. you don't really have a legitimate reason to be crying over here because everything was fine. There's no reason you should be afraid. You should be able to go to Eretz Canaan. And since this is why you're crying for no good reason, on this year, on this day, on Tisha B'Av, for all future generations you'll be crying. And they said, pelt him with stones. Uksib Kavod Hashem Nira B'Oyel Moyed. And the honor of Hashem was found by the Oyel Moyed. So Amar Rabbi Chia Barabba Molamed, we learn from here, Shenatu Avonim, they took stones, the Zarkum Klapi Mal, and they started throwing it at Hashem. They're throwing stones at God. The Amuso Hanoshim Moitzei Dimas Haaretz Rabba Magefa. So these people who spoke bad ended up dying from a plague. Bama Gefa. So Amar Rav Shimon ben Lakish Shemesu Misa Mishuna, that they ended up dying an unusual death. It was a Misa Mishuna. Amar Rabbi Chanina Bar Papa Darsh Rav Shilo Ish Kamar to Marta Malamed Shinish Tarbabe was Shainam V'Nafal Al Tiburam, that their tongues literally got long and it fell upon their stomachs. Vahavi Toloyim Yoitzais Mil Shainam, and worms came out of their tongues, literally. V'Nechnasos V'Tiburam, and they entered into their stomachs, and V'Tiburam, and from their stomachs, V'Nechnasos Mil Shainam, back into their tongues. Okay. Rav Nachman Yitzchak Omer ba'askara mesu. They died by askara, says Rashi Shiba al Lashon Hara. It's brought down in the second paragraph in Masechta Shabbos Malikin that the punishment for Lashon Hara mentions a few things. The punishment is askara, which is a form of strangulation because it has a punishment from the throat because you didn't talk properly, so therefore you end up dying like mida kedeg mida through the throat. Kivan she'ola hachana in Shemi Yisrael in the Yarden. So now we go back after we finish talking about the Meraglim. Let's look at question 3 quickly. Ma pirish pasuk sar sil me'aleim. Only Rashi. What does it mean that their tzilam left from them? And that's referring to Eve that died. Shemes Eve shahay yachol hagin aleihim b'schusay, because he was able to protect them with his zechus. So it's actually, you would think it's a good thing that Eve died. Okay. Of course, Eve was not such a terrible person, as we know in Sefer Eve. Okay. Weiter. Kivan sha'ol ha'charan she'v'yisrael min Yarden. Once the last person left the Yarden, chazu mayim mimkoim, the water came back. Shnemar v'hi ba'alos ha'kohanim, and when the Kohanim went up, Noisi Aaron B'Ras Hashem, as we said, this is the one of the 3 times which the Kohanim carried the Aaron, Mitay Chayarden, Nit Ku Kapois Ragli HaKohanim. It was removed the palms of the Kapos Ragli HaKohanim, of that of the Kohanim, El HaCharava, they went to the dry land, Yeshuvu, and they returned of Yeshuva Mehayardin Lim Kaiman, and it went back to its place, the Yelchu Kitmol Shilsham, and it went back as it was yesterday before, Al Koil Gedusav, on all of its banks. Nimsa Aaron Benaisav of Kohanim and Sadachad. So end up, based on this pasuk, we interpret that Aaron and those who carried it and all the Kohanim actually were on one side of Yisrael but Sadachad, when the Israel were still on the other side. So Nas Aaron es Naisav, and Aaron went and carried those people, Va'avar, and caused them to cross over the Yarden further in a miraculous way. Shnemar vehi ka'asher tam kol lavor, after they completed crossing, v'yavar Aaron Hashem, so then afterwards Aaron Hashem passed v'hakohan of ne'am. Yal davar zen nenesh Uzzah. Now this Uzzah was punished. Shnemar, as the pasuk says, v'yavoho ad goyren kidoin, v'yishlach Uzzah's yado echles as Aaron. So he saw that it looked like the Aaron was slipping, and therefore he stretched out his hand so as to catch it so that it would not fall. The Amrlo cut it, so Uzzah wasn't in that time, okay? This is a different time. But when the Aaron was slipping, so in his generation, so he went to grab it. But the truth is, it wasn't going to fall anyway. Uzzah didn't need to do so. So Amrlo Kodesh Baruch Hu, Uzzah, Noisav, Nasa Atzmoi, Lo Kol Shekain. it's able, the Aron can carry others. To carry itself, no question it could carry itself. So the truth is, it doesn't even need to have people carrying it. It's just almost like for show or for chashivus. But in reality, it's not necessary. Then the pasuk says, "V'yichar Hashem, v'yichar af Hashem b'Uzzah." So Hashem was angry at Uzzah for going after the Aron and touching it. V'yakehu sham al hashal b'gaymer, and he was punished. Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Lezer, chad aimer al iski shalu, v'chad aimer she'asa srachav b'fanav. So what does this mean? So what is al iski shalu? Shgaga sheshagal echazbay. It comes from the word shaygeg, that because of he was gravitating toward it like this so quickly, but he should have had in his mind that the Aron wouldn't be needed to have done so therefore he was punished. Or shasas rachav, the alashon ki yashal zeischa, which sounds like that he relieved himself. Shasa srachav b'fanav. They actually relieved himself in front of the Aron, which that certainly shows a lack of respect. Yamasham im Aron halokim, and he died there with the Aron Hashem. Rabbi Yochanan Uzzah ba'olam haba. It means when it says he went with it, it means that he still was zeicha to olam haba. Shneimar im Aron halokim ma Aron olam kayim af Uzzah ba'ol olam haba. V'yichar David, and Hashem was also angry on David Melech, Asher Paratz Hashem Peretz b'Uzzah, that he did this Peretz, this breach with Uzzah. Rabbi Lezer Shishtanu Panav Kecharara, that literally he changed his face like that of like a pastry. Elam Yata Kol Hechad except Yichar Hachanami. So what does it mean? Whenever it says Vayichar, that's what it's referring to. The Hasam Ksiv Af, Hachol Ksiv Af. So over here, since it says Vayichar David al Asher Paratz Hashem, so we see that again. It depends with regard to the word af. Says Rashi, Nenish David Shemes Uzal Yadai. The fact that he died in his generation, it was also a reflection on David. Darish Rabim Niman Nenish David Ne Shikar L'Divitar Zmirais. Different reason, because he called the Torah Zmiros, like a song. It's like just a plain, simple folklore song. Shnemer Zmiros Hayuli Chukecha. Beves Meguroi, in the house of that who I'm afraid. I'm like Kodesh Baruch Hu. Divrei Torah shekasu behen Torah, which says that if you just blink your eye, you're going to end up losing it. Atakari and Zmira is just going to call it like a song. Doesn't mean there's nothing wrong calling it like a song, like you singing it and you love learning Torah, but it's referring to it's just like something very basic and simple and not necessarily so chashiv, which is hard to understand why David wouldn't frame it in such a way, which again is being construed here, is being interpreted that he was wrong. So it must be he was wrong. Hareini machshilcha b'davar she'afil tedakash b'leis rabban yoydin oisa. I'm going to cause you to stumble on something that even little kids would make a mistake, would not make a mistake. That for the children, those of Kahas l'nasan, they were not given the wagons ki avodas hakodesh v'gomer, because the avodas hakodesh instead was on their shoulders. V'ihu asin be'eglata, and he put the Aron on wagons, which is not what should have happened. You weren't supposed to transport the Aron on wagons. It was supposed to be be'katef. V'yach be'anshe be'shemesh, so he smote the people be'shemesh ki rob Aron, because they saw it. Mishum derab yachalakim. Understand, just because they saw it, what's their fault that they saw it? This is referring to when the Aron was being returned from the days of the Plishtim. There were people plowing and they were just working. They looked up and they saw the Aron. What are they supposed to do? So Rabbi Avol, Rabbi Lezer Chadaimer, Kaitzrin, they were reaping, and Mishtachavim Hayu, and they were bowing down. What does that mean? So Rashi says, so it was a lack of respect. They just continued working, even though it was the Aron, and they bowed down, but they should have stopped working. They just continued to do their work, so it showed a lack of respect. That's why they're punished. That's one answer. Words also said. What does that mean? So let's look as we continue to Lamed Hamid Beis. Man Amariach, who angered you? This is what they said regarding to the Aron. Demriat, that you are so angry. Says Rashi, Mi hichsicha kishakasta. Who got you angry that you were angry? V'litzaltas atzmacha min hashivya, that you did not save yourself from the captivity of the Philistines. Now, mi mefaischa, who, let's continue the Gemara actually. Uman also aloch diapayast. What happened that you were appeased? In other words, why were you originally allowed to be captured by the Plishtim, which no one probably shouldn't have come out to war? It was done really for desperate measures because we saw that we were losing. So Chafni and Pinchas brought the Aron out. Chafni and Pinchas were killed. The Plishtim took it. It was very challenging. They ended up getting sick, got hemorrhoids and everything because of it. So they ended up bringing it back. They had it go back. And it was caught. It was returned. But the question is, why now are you coming back? Why were you captured to begin? So they were speaking about the Aron in a very plain manner, which was disrespectful. It then continues in Shmuel Aleph, Yach ba'am shivim ish, b'chamishim elef ish. It says they were smote 70 people, and then v'chamishim elef, 50,000. So Rabbi Avodah, Rabbi Lezer, Chad Omer shivim ish hayu. There's really 70. V'chol echad v'echad shoka chamishim elef. Each one was such an important person. Was like each one was comparable to 50,000. The Chad Omer chamishim elef hayu. It's actually 50,000. V'chol echad v'echad shoka keshivim Sanhedrin. Each one was like on the madrega of the Sanhedrin. Vahi. Now we go back to Shmuel Beis. Kitzadu naisi Aron Hashem shisha sa'adim. That when they took 6 steps. The Yizbach Shor Umaria, and they slaughtered the ox and its fatling. Uksiv Shiva Parim, was 7 cows, or Shiva Elim and 7 rams. Amar al Papabar Shmuel al Isk al Kol Psia. Regarding every one of these steps, Shor Marie, they provided again these animals. Al Kol Shesh V'Shesh Psios Shiva Parim Shiva Elim. And on every one of these 6 steps, they also provided these 7 cows and 7 rams. Armalei Rav Chisda Im Kain Milesa Es Kol Aretz B'Mois. Then you basically filled up the entire world with death, says Rashi. Mizbechois the Al Kol Psia Mizbeach. If every step you had to sacrifice these animals, that means you had to have a mizbeach by every single step. So it means there's a lot of blood all over the place from one step to the next. On every one of the 6 steps, there was these animals. Regarding the Shisha Sidarim, the 6 matters of the 6 steps, Shiva Parim Shiva Elim. Uksiv Kidoin, Uksiv Navoin, Rabbi Yochanan Batchila Kidoin. Originally was like a spear, it was saif Nachoin, says Rashi. So Rashi says, V'yavo ad Garan Kidoin, Batchila Kishibo Ha'aron Sham. When Aaron was being brought there, Nasalahim Kidoin Hahirig Shahar Guza. It was just like this, like a spear that killed Uzzah. Once it waited there for 6 months, it was in his house for 6 months. Nasa Nachain, it became good. Shehechenes Beisai, that his house was prepared. Yivarach Hashem es oivid edaim ishto shalav kachavim v'shmona kol aseh yeldo shisha b'keres echad. Each one of the people, all of his children, all of his daughter-in-laws, his wife, they had 6 tuplets each. So we actually will find that there were 3 different sets of these 12 stones. And this is going to be TA 15, as well as almost identical TB 16. Gimel Pamim Mekim B'nei Sol Avanim Be'el Mekaimais. TB 16. So where are these three places where they set up these stones? Echad shehekim Moshe be'eretz Moav. One time Moshe set these up in Moav. Shnemer be'ever hayardin be'eretz Moav. It says in Eretz Moav, Hoyel Moshe be'er v'goymer. So he explained the Torah. Hoyel oimer v'kasat lehenes kol divrei haTorah zos v'goymer. Should write the whole Torah. V'asim be'er be'er. Fine. That's one. V'echad shehekim Yoshua b'toch hayardin. The second time that they wrote all these stones with the Torah on it is when Yeshua set it up b'toich hayardin. It means in the Yarden. Shnemer shneim esrei avanim hekim Yeshua b'toich hayardin. The echad, and the third time shehekim Gilgal. It was set up in Gilgal. Shnemer aves shneim esrei havanim ha'el asher lokachu. Tanaban. Ketzad kasvi Yisrael as Torah. How was the Torah exactly written on these stones? So it's a machlokas. Rabbi Yehuda Omer al gabi avanim kasvua. So at Har Avel, they wrote the Torah on the stones. Shnemer the kasavta al havanim. It's written on the stones. That's called divrei haTorah zos v'gomer. V'yachach sadu oisam atzid. Since it says al, means they had to write it first on the stones, and then afterwards they covered up the words with plaster. Similar Rav Shimon l'dvarecha. This is hard to understand. According to your words, hey chalamdu umois shel oiso hazman Torah. How did they learn Torah? If it was covered with plaster, so how did they learn the Torah then? And why was it done that way? Why would you write the Torah and then cover up the words so no one could read it? So bini yaser nasam HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He gave them great understanding. B'shigru noiterin shalahen. The kilfu esatzid. So basically he gave them this additional insight and he caused them to peel off the plaster. V'yisua v'al davar zeh nischatem gazar dinam lever shachas shayhem limud v'lo. So the truth is, they had the opportunity to learn, but they actually didn't. But it's an interesting idea. What it's basically saying is that it was written this way so that eventually it would be preserved, so that later on they could peel it off and then they could read it. Rav Shimon Omer al Gavit Sid Kasvua. Fakert. First, they took the stones and they put plaster on it. The Kasvul Hendel Mata. Then they wrote under it. They wrote on the plaster. Laman, and then regarding the Canaanim who are killed, the pasuk says, "Laman asher yilamdu eschem lasos k'chol v'gomer." So, because they're not going to adhere to the Torah. So, halomanata, if they did accept the Torah, she'im hayu chayzim b'tshuva hayu mekabel noisan. Those who live outside of Eretz Yisrael, that they're mekabel the Torah, so even though they may be from these nations, they'll be spared. Rabbi Bar Shila, my time to Rav Shimon. How do we know that this is true according to Rav Shimon, that they'd be spared if they did tshuva? Regarding these nations that was burnt by plaster. Al Iskit Sid. It's referring to Al Iski Sid, says Rashi, Shatar Nichtav Alav, the Torah is written on it, the fact that they could have learned Torah if they didn't, which means it's only because they didn't learn from it. But if they did, then they would have been spared. Rabbi Yehuda Hitzid. Matzid in lo takana. When it comes to tzid, there's no takana, there's nothing you can do to change it. El sreifa, just burning it. So af oisam hakusim in lohem takana el sreifa. The only eitzah for them is sreifa, which is referring to Gehenna. Says Rashi, Shekol Zman Shein Misgairin Behem Karim Amim in Chelkam El Misreifas Hasid. So long as they don't do tshuva, that is going to be their destiny. Kamana Zohadasanya. The pasuk says V'shavisa Shivyoi, that will take captives. So Rabos Kananim Shebachutz Laaretz Shim Chayis Metshuva Mekabel Noisan. It comes to tell us again that as long as they are able to do tshuva, then they will be accepted. Question 4. We'll stop here. Vayu'amim misrafais tzid al shem ma mazkir hapasik tzid. Why is tzid mentioned? Plaster ba'anshim shel amen when it comes to their punishment. So it's either shall iskit sid, as we said, that even though they could have learned the Torah, which had sid on it, and they decided not to, therefore that's their punishment. Or just like sid in lotakana el b'sreifa, so too their destiny is Gehenim, unless of course they do tshuva, and then that will be different. Ad kan.